Welcome to the World Builders Anvil, episode 292, secret episode, the history of Nashville by night. Don't tell Michael. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge.
Break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the muck of Java and build. Welcome back. As always, my name is Jeffrey W. Ingram, and in our summer of discontent, I'm doing my second secret episode to try and stay up to date with the show as best as I can. It's very trying. I'll talk about that in a little bit, but first I want to talk a little bit about the history of Nashville by night. Now, if you go back to episode 286, there'll be a link in the show notes. If you go to garduel.com, look up episode 286, or 292 is this episode, or 286 is the first one, where I started talking about Nashville by night, a sort of classic World of Darkness setting that I'm starting to create. And so in the last one, I talked a bit about the theme, the geography, and some of the major points of interest in Nashville, and some of the by night or the vampire politics of the town, and the Camarilla clan structure of the town. Now, there are some things I talked about, like Nashville is a significantly larger city in this setting, so obviously some differences have happened. And one of the things I like to do, especially if I'm working up from Earth and I want to do alternate history, I like to create a few things that change. Like one, I like to know sort of the point of deviation, sort of what is different. What's the first thing in the chain of events that has caused the Earth I'm in to deviate from the real world? And even if I'm doing like a fictional story, like in my apocalypse setting or my dragon setting, what I like to think of is, okay, this is on Earth. What makes this Earth different? And sometimes it goes back really far. And in the case of Nashville, not as far as some other things, but there are some significant things that have changed. So what is the point of deviation? And then I don't just create fictional events from that point on. Some things still happen. Sometimes I subvert things that happen and I use them to my advantage. They're not necessarily exactly what happened in history, but they're built off of things that have actually happened. So let's go, and I'm going to go and talk about not all of the events of Nashville, but I'm going to talk about some key events, why I chose them, and what I hoped to get out of them. And then you can go to facebook.com/groups/Undercroft, join there, answer at least the first two questions, and the third one's optional. Go through the three questions, answer them, and you can actually make fun of me within there. Now, back to episode 292 here, and the alt history. So the first date, the point of deviation, is April 30th, 1892. Now, on that date, Ephraim Grizzard, I believe, is this how you say his name? But he was killed in history. He was the second man in a week who was actually lynched. I think it was 4 days before, on April 24th, I believe. His brother was lynched, and then a few days later, he was lynched. Now, I'm taking his lynching, and in the history books, that event would still be there. However, in my world, he actually was not killed. He was actually taken in by a Ventru. He was turned into a vampire, and the people who were trying to perpetrate the event and the people who reported on the event, their minds were used against themselves, and those people believe the event happened as is listed in history books. So if you go in the history, I actually used Wicca for my history building here. There'll also be a link to that in the show notes. But if you go to Wiki and look up the history of Nashville, you could read a little bit about his death and his brother's death 7 days before. Now, the reason I won this event is one, I think racism sucks. It's stupid, and lynching is just ridiculous. I don't know what happened. I really don't care, but the idea of it's pretty disgusting to me. And so I thought that would be a good way to deviate some stuff that I don't think is necessarily bad into my darker version of Nashville, because it's not only larger, but it's also darker than the real world because it's Nashville by night. And so I wanted something where, I can kind of justify some bad things happening and to change some of the conditions to sort of tweak the feeling of Nashville in the future. And I thought if you took this character whose brother was actually killed, I think 6 days before him, but you turn him into a vampire, and this is the respectable, business-like clan, the Ventru, not a type of clan you think would be petty or cruel, but Ephraim here is going to be a little upset going into the future. It's going to tweak some things of Nashville and sort of help change the world and the geography around Nashville, which to me helps play into the future. And sure, it's all a BS mind game I'm playing with myself, but it works out. And so Nashville also had a couple cholera epidemics, and I added in a new epidemic on April 24th. And yes, that day is not picked by accident. That would be the same day his brother was killed in 1892. But this is in 1895. There is a flu epidemic that strikes Nashville. Oh, the horrors of it all. And essentially, what this was Ephraim decided, he'd been around for a few years as a vampire, had started to, I guess, sink his teeth into the role of being a vampire, and through some minor machinations planned his revenge and very brutally got revenge on the people he knew was involved in not only his lynching, but his brother's lynching, many of them whom were the same people. A few were only in one or the other. He hunted down and killed all of them, not in front of people, but in very bloody, horrifying ways, ripping them apart. Now, to help cover up this, the president at the time was Grover Cleveland, through vampire politics going higher up. He actually sends in the army to surround Nashville very quickly, to cut it off with the cry that there's a flu epidemic in town. So while this is all going off, and Nashville is literally cut off from the outside world, you have a vampire who's relatively new, but still very powerful, sneaking around and killing people. And why the streak goes on is this period of time they call the flu epidemic of Nashville. Now, in history, would have noted it was a very lucky occurrence that Grover Cleveland acted so quickly and had the resolve to surround the town in what was probably a minor constitutional problem at the time. But surrounded the town with the military so people could not get in or out as he went around killing people. Now, there was actually no epidemic. It was literally Ephraim murdering people. But this is the way the Camarilla will try to protect the illusion, this thing they call the masquerade. The masquerade is the game vampires play, so non-vampires don't realize that they're there. And so this act in history was a neat place for this guy who was murdered in real life to get some revenge for his death. And not only his death, more importantly, he was focused really more on getting revenge for his brother's death because he didn't really die. He was probably upset with what happened to him, but at this point, he was probably kind of stoked that, it's not too many people who are getting lynched who have the chance to get revenge for their own murder or the murder of their brother. Now, in 1927, there was a great flood in Nashville. Now, I wanted to take advantage of this great flood. I don't think it's actually listed in the wiki. I actually looked this up. I wanted a great flood because around the same time that this is going on in Nashville with Ephraim dying, Nashville is becoming known as the city where sort of like Confederate sympathies started building up. And so I think the Daughters of the Confederacy, I believe, started, or at least the chapter started there, somewhere around 1895. And then you had like a Confederate veteran magazine that was getting shipped out from there as well, too. And this is our little buddy Ephraim again, who's now much older, much more wise and powerful, but there was a flooding. And it hit mainly in my setting of the world. I don't know about real life, but the flooding hit particularly hard downtown Nashville and the west end of the city, which is where a lot of the Confederate sympathizers were. And now this is really a long time after the war. I don't even know if the magazine was probably still there. It probably wasn't there in its true form anymore. I don't know how many Confederate veterans there still were in 1927, but in my world, it was there. And the owner and many of the key people who ran the magazine, all of the board members and major people in the Daughters of the Confederacy, all strangely drowned in this flood. Several hundred people drowned, most of which were either Klan members, members of the Daughters of the Confederacy, or people connected to and behind or creating the Confederate magazine. And the idea is I wanted to shift Nashville. If you go to Nashville today, I don't know about living there, but it doesn't feel like truly deep South because of all the music industry down there. It's a little bit more accepting city than someone from the North might think the South would be, which is probably an unfair assumption anyway at this point. I don't know. But the idea is I wanted that string gone. And it's to kind of show that Ephraim is connected here. I wanted a way for the North to feel more connected because I wanted the economic benefits to start benefiting Nashville later on, getting rid of all of the ties to Confederacy, make it more appealing to people of the time from the North to invest and be involved in Nashville, where they might not be quite so sympathetic or wanting to be involved in a city that is sort of tied up with the Klan and former Confederate collaborators, essentially. So I used the Great Flood of 1927, and really this is something that did happen. Ephraim actually took advantage of this to go back, and to him it was striking once again some more vengeance, but it was a more timely thing, and he just literally drowned people who he felt needed to be drowned, and he had some people working with him. He was much more powerful this time. He was definitely, comfortable within his power scheme and growing in power. Ephraim would end up becoming the prince of the city for a period of time, but he's now gone on. He is the archon for the Camarilla in the area. He's a pretty powerful character for his age. It's because the person who turned him into a Ventru was a powerful character. And he's still, in modern day been around for, over a couple hundred years as a vampire. So, pretty powerful, but more powerful than he should be for the day. He's actually connected quite closely to William Cowper, who, if you remember from episode 286, is the prince of the town, an Englishman who had moved there as well, too, who would have supported him in definitely the endeavors of 1927. And they have the same father as well, too. Now, the Great Flood's over. Most things kind of still happen as history goes until 1952, or really 53. 1952, Eisenhower wins the presidency of the United States with Richard Nixon as his vice president. Now, on June 6th, 1953, Eisenhower is assassinated by Walter Rauff. Walter Rauff is a Nazi who I'm sure they finally got him to justice somehow, but he was one of these Nazis that was getting chased around South America trying to escape the West. But in my little alternate history, he being chased ends up in America somehow and ends up killing Eisenhower. Now, this would set up for Eisenhower's vice president to become president. His vice president is Nixon. Now, to be honest here, I originally was not going to use Nixon for this. I knew he was the vice president, but I had my eyes set on one of his opponents, and as I kill him off in 1952, have one of the opponents from the election, Robert Taft, not the Taft who became president. This is obviously a different one. I'm sure related because I believe he was from, I think they were both from Ohio, I believe. But I'm like, I don't really know this guy Taft, and he's kind of a villain here. So I'm going to take a guy in presidential politics who definitely has been proven to be a villain, and I'm not going to throw someone else into the role. So I decided to go a little bit later, had Nixon become president after the assassination of Dwight D. Eisenhower on June 6, 1953. And for those of you who are World War II buffs, you'll realize, if I got my days correct there, June 6th was D-Day. So it was, Walter picked this day specifically because of D-Day. It was an anniversary celebration of D-Day, I'm sure. But now, this actually is also putting Nixon in place because I want some corruption going on here in 1956. I think it was called the Highways, the Federal Aid Highways Bill, I believe was what it was called, was passed, and that's what sort of created that national interstate system, the interstate of highways. And now there were some interstate-like highways already at this point. I think the first one, I believe, was in Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania Turnpike was created a long time before this. But this is like when the federal government's like, we're going ahead with this. And this was an Eisenhower thing, so it also kind of makes sense to keep Eisenhower around enough for this to start its wheels. Now, Nixon here is never going to have his Watergate, but he's part of this group that is invested heavily in this town called Nashville. It's a pretty small city at this point still. Starting to grow a little bit, but, nowhere close to where it needs to be, a city of 3 to 4 million people, which is what I have it at, which right now I don't think it's even 1 million people in Nashville. I could be wrong with that. But, essentially, in 1956, instead of the first contract for an interstate going to Missouri, the first 3 contracts are for I-24, I-40, and I-65, all of which are in Nashville, all of which happen to had the roads in my by night Earth start in Nashville at the same time, creating a huge construction boom. The federal government starts buying up a lot of property to start getting the highways through there. So I really screw up the travel for people in Nashville in 1956, but it starts having, the military industrial complex starts dumping some money into Nashville. And the president is vicariously benefiting via profit. Now, October 6, 1957, an article comes through linking accusations that the president is connected to what they call the Opry House Scandal, which starts to break. And then every week news stories are coming out from CBS and their guy in charge, their anchor at the time, Douglas Edwards, starts releasing articles once a week talking about this scandal. Now, the good thing was a lot of it was all accusations. There were some key people who were leaking information, but there's no real there's some corroboration, but it was all sort of like he said, she said kind of stuff. As they're starting to approach to getting hard evidence against the president, and these weekly articles going on all the way until the next year, January 8th of 1958, Douglas Edwards has an untimely death where he's killed in a car accident when he's driving home from a weekend show in the Catskills, because I believe the Catskills were big at that time. I've recently been to the Catskills, and I like the area of New York, so I figured, just a car accident, a famous guy, which people might have been suspicious on. However, I'm sure in a completely non-coincidental thing, on January 7th, the day before, this corporation called Sevier, I believe, Sevier, named after the first governor of Tennessee, Aerospace, launched the maiden flight of their version of the Concorde, which is many years before the Concorde, which I think started in 1969. This is a 1957 launch, essentially their supersonic commercial airline jet. The maiden flight goes the day before Douglas Edwards dies. Everyone's talking about this super new jet. It flew from Nashville to London in under 4 hours, and everyone's amazed. Everyone's talking about that. Next day, Douglas dies in a car accident. People just don't look into it. They're more focused on what happened on January 7th. Walter Cronkite becomes the new CBS correspondent a couple years early. Story gets buried, goes away. The Opry House Scandal sort of disappears into the annals of history as a failed, as there not really being any evidence against the president, who would, of course, be nearing the end of his term here. Already in his second term, deeply at this point. Now, in 1962, Nashville becomes the 10th largest city in the United States. No major event, but, its population was probably, approaching 1 million at the time. But for Nashville, because of this, a lot of economic money, a lot of money goes into this aerospace company who's sort of like the Northrop Grumman in my world, this giant military contractor, but they're based out of Nashville, which drives a lot of federal money into Nashville throughout and in the areas around Nashville. Their major location in the real world would be called Antioch, Tennessee. But in my world, it's all part of Nashville. It's all been sort of sucked into Nashville at this point, as I talked about a bit in episode 286. And the idea is I wanted this scandal to get the feds to use the power of the federal purse string to start dumping money into Nashville. When I start dumping money into Nashville, entrepreneurs who are connected to the scandal and ones who just see like dollar signs in Nashville start going to Nashville. It creates an economic boom where they go from a very small city, in 1956, or we'll say 1953 when, Eisenhower became president. By 1962, in 6 years, they became the 10th largest city in the United States, which means they were growing really, really, really fast. And then by 1987, in a much slower pace, they became the third largest city, surpassing Chicago, which, somewhere, around 3 million. And in the current day terms, they're probably somewhere between 4 to 5 million people. The economy's been doing good, but they're nowhere close to, nor am I really planning to have them getting bigger than like a New York City. But that is where we stand. And those last two, I probably, if I was putting together a timeline for players, I wouldn't mention that stuff. I might, just because if people knew Nashville, they'd be like, why is Nashville like so big? And as I talked about before, I needed it bigger because I wanted to showcase some of the areas that really exist there. And I needed it in places where I didn't mind changing things. So Antioch, I'm not very familiar with the area. But, some of the areas just to the west of Nashville, like where Loveless Cafe is, I kind of want that to feel the same as it does. I want downtown Nashville maybe to be a little bit taller, but feel the same. But, I need some of the areas like Samaria and Antioch to be built up and incorporated into Nashville at this point to make it a larger city. And kind of like Chicago, it's not a total vertical city like in New York City, but it's, like skyline wise, somewhere between going to New York City and somewhere like Chicago, which they both have really big downtown areas. But outside of that, or Chicago becomes very flat with maybe a few bursts of big buildings, where New York is very dense in a very small area. So Nashville is not as big landmass wise as a place like Chicago. But its population is a little bit larger, so it's a little bit more elevated, a little bit more shadows down to the street, make it a little bit more vampire friendly, but has a lot of, gives me a lot of opportunity to leave certain areas kind of the same, like Centennial and Bicentennial Park. I want those to be the same. Certain neighborhoods, I want to have the same feel and vibe as when I went to go visit them a couple of years ago in the very interesting town. So I want it to be different, but the same. I want to steal some of the feels and vibes of real Nashville and twist it and make it larger and better in some ways and worse in others than it is in the real world. Now, if I was to create a timeline for players, put together a player's book, these would not be all of the events that would be on there. There'd be some other, like the Battle of Nashville would be listed there, and probably when some key other epidemics were happening, and some other, especially the closer you get to present day, the more events I would kind of throw in there. The building of the Batman building, of course, would be marked in the calendar just because it's still there. It's still the Batman building. It's just super awesome. You have to have a Batman building if you have Nashville. It's one of many things you have to have. But really, there's some other things that will get built into the timeline as I start fleshing out some of the characters, which I'll probably do the next time I put one of these episodes together. I'm going to probably start going through and actually building some classic World of Darkness characters. I'll build them ahead of time, but then I'll talk about them and talk about why I picked the things that I did, how I think it fits into their character and not, and kind of cover some of the things I like to do with characters in general. The difference between that and like a character for a novel would be I need to know the system information, not only the character information. At that point, I might even start bundling some of the stuff together to throw out there for people if they want to steal it to use as NPCs in their games or not. I don't know. I might do it. Just let me know if you think that's a cool idea or not. But the thing is, especially when you're working from an existing timeline, it becomes easier if you pick that point where you deviate from, and it could, it's like you take like a great fire in a city or an event like that and make some important event major, or something, an event that to me is powerful, but maybe not so big in the in the textbooks. Like the Great Fire of like Chicago or London was much more devastating than the lynching of Ephraim Grizzard. But I'm sure if you were Ephraim, someone who knew him or looked like him, I'm sure it was very impactful on people. So I thought it was a good event to pick as that point of deviation, because I wanted Nashville not to forget its Southern past, but I wanted it to disappear a little faster than it would have naturally. The connection to slavery and to the Confederate South. I kind of wanted that stuff fleshed out, and I kind of used these events to do that. Not that I necessarily wanted to change the city that much, and in a way, keeping some of those elements in would make for some interesting thematic stories. You can obviously get more into race and stuff like that into your stories, and but that's not the stories I wanted to tell here. So, so they're not being told. There will obviously always be stuff in there about race and ethnicity issues and religious differences, because those are real struggles that people still have today. But the cool thing is, as the city's a little bigger and larger, you'll probably even have more of that, because you're going to have more and different types of people here. And in the World of Darkness terms, not only, different like ethnic groups, but different types of supernatural creatures, different types of strange entities that can go bump in the night. And so this sort of allows me to go to talk about any issues I want to. But I still wanted the legacy of the history to be there, because like in modern America, I mean, that's an important topic, even to this day. Agree or disagree with people's opinions on it is fine. But if you don't think, the treatment of blacks in this country, before and after the ending of slavery has not impacted this country, you're not paying attention. Now, in the rest of the country, it's not necessarily changed as much as it has in Nashville, but I needed a little bit more of a way to attract Northerners to the South quicker before the, invention, but sped up by the invention of air conditioning, which, as we all know, created a great movement from the North to the South anyway. So I hope you enjoy this episode. A lot about history and why I'm choosing things. Everything I did here was wrong and right at the same time. If you think I did something right or something wrong, go to facebook.com/groups/Undercroft. And once again, there'll be 3 questions. The first 2 you need to answer. The third one about your email address is completely optional. Go ahead and join today and let me know what you think, or let me know how you deal with history. But the big takeaway is, when you create your histories, start off creating the events that are important to you as the storyteller. That's your first run through. These are things I need to happen to set up conditions for the reason why country A and country B hate each other, or the reason why there's going to be a great fire in Nashville in 1972. What are the conditions that create that stuff? And after the conditions are dealt with, once they go through and are fixed, what are the differences? And so as a game master, you know them, and you might or might not even share all those events with people. Then when you're going to deliver it to players, you add other sort of bigger types of stuff that people expect. And you want, if it's something smaller that people would not expect to see in a timeline, add a few more like them as sort of as seasoning to make it a little bit more complete. You flesh out your timelines the closer you get to modern day, and then people look at it, and to them it feels like they're looking at an actual a little history timeline there. And then you might take out a few things that might not be common knowledge. It's that thing to remember too, is when you have a timeline for a player, it's something that any reasonable person should know. So now for a world building task of the day, I want you to take a timeline of a world you've done and kind of look at what are the key events that sort of, in the central place of your world, the place you talk about the most. What were the key events in the history that got it to where it is today, that made it that important power that's growing or declining, whatever it is? What got it to that point today? Now, for the real world task, have a backup plan. This is the second time since episode 286 where I've done an episode on my own. I did it because a lot of chaos in my life. Someone in my family got very, very sick and almost passed away. Not my mother. I don't want to say who they are because I've not asked or talked to either one of them to say if I could. Even though a lot of people do know. But someone very important to my family got very, very sick and is luckily recovering. And someone else, very, very close friends to the family, whose parents have always treated me, like family, had a stroke and almost passed away. So a couple major things going on in life. Plus, Michael's job sometimes makes it difficult for us to get together now. So, but creating these episodes so I have a way to not fall behind too much or to try and start getting back ahead a little bit again. So I do hope you all like these episodes. I've gotten pretty good feedback from the previous one I did. So hopefully you guys like this one as well too. I might deliver some of this information in different ways at other times. And if I come up with a consistent way I want to do it when I have more time to start focusing on this, it's something I want to do more of because I enjoy doing it. So remember, have a backup plan because stuff happens all the time. And if you have a backup plan for important things, then you're less likely to get burned too bad. So just have a backup plan. Hope you all had a great episode, and I will talk to you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.